All right. This morning we are in 2 Samuel chapter 19. And this is, among other things, Joab's rebuke of David. We find David's grief has just become excessive. We're going to get into that. We find David pardoning his enemies that have betrayed him. We find his not so triumphant return to Jerusalem from his reign in exile across the Jordan. We find that he is we find that both the southern kingdom of Judah and the northern kingdom of Israel are at odds with one another as they fight over where David should reestablish his reign. So we're going to see all of that this morning, but this again, Joab starts out with Joab rebuking David, chapter 19, and there are how many verses? There's 43 verses to this chapter, so we have a lot to cover this morning, and I'll go fairly quick, but do the best you can to follow along. So let's pray as we begin. Lord, we're grateful for our time together, and we ask, Lord, that you would prepare our hearts even now to receive this historical record that you have preserved for us, that we might hear and learn and understand and be changed by it and be warned by it. So, Lord, we ask that your Spirit would lead us today. We commit our time to you in Jesus' name. Amen. So just as we set up this chapter, it's important that we just take a little bit of review of the previous major events that have led up to David's exile. You remember his kingdom is in total disarray. The Lord's judgment that he put upon David for his treacherous murder of Uriah is now ringing loudly in his ears. I'm sure every day as he woke up, he keeps thinking about what has happened in his life since he committed that heinous sin. You recall that his firstborn Bathsheba is dead. His daughter Tamar is raped and shamed by her half-brother Amnon. Then Amnon is murdered by his half-brother Absalom, the full brother of Tamar. All this is going on. Absalom has overrun Jerusalem. He's driven his own father out of the city and taken up residence in the palace. In the midst of all this chaos, David is humiliated by a cousin of Saul by the name of Shimei, who cursed David and threw stones at him as he left Jerusalem. In shame, and that sin, and we need to keep that in mind because Shimei's sin was worthy of death, as we read about in Exodus 22, where it tells us, "You shall not revile God or curse a ruler of your people." We should remember that today, by the way, because there are times we're all tempted, are we not? So now Absalom's dead. He's killed by Joab. That's David's five-star general who unhesitatingly, if you recall from last week's lesson, killed Absalom as he hung there in the tree by his head. David is grieving, and his grieving is massive. If we go back to chapter 18 and verse 33, look there. David cries over Absalom saying, my son, he says it 5 times, "My son Absalom, were that I was dead and not him. My son," he's inconsolable. And he was probably grieving also over his own failure as a father. So here we have a broken, grieving father that has lost touch with his kingdom in a sense. He's lost touch so much that even when Absalom is dead and the kingdom appears to be back within his grasp to reclaim his reign, he is completely disabled by his grief. If you recall, David is still in Mahanaim across the Jordan where he had fled and he'd set up his kingdom in exile, and his grieving continues far beyond what's the usual mourning period. How long do people in the Old Testament, even today in Eastern countries, how long do they typically mourn? I mean, at least publicly, maybe a week. Typically, it's a week. You remember how long David's mourning lasted for his son born to Bathsheba? Actually, he was grieving up until the time his son died, the newborn son died. And after that, what did he do? got up, had dinner, started acting normally again. Why? Because his son was gone and there's nothing more he could do. He says, I'll see him again. But for now, he was gone. So this is completely different. David's mourning goes on and on and on. Absalom's death had overwhelmed him. And it just may be that David's guilt was greater than his grief. I think that's most likely. David's great sin has left a trail of death, destruction, and shame behind. Again, his kingdom is shattered. His people are not sure what to do. Absalom may be gone, but David isn't acting now as a king at all. And Joab, his general, has had enough of David's grief. He was David's, if you recall, Joab was David's chief protector, and David surely still needed protection, but more, he needed protection from himself. So instead of rejoicing over the salvation of his subjects, David shamed them, and Joab's soldiers, instead of rejoicing at the victory the Lord has given him, David ignored his army. He had ignored his people. He stayed literally in his room, and he cried over Absalom. And now Joab's mad, and the soldiers are ready to abandon David. So David now does an intervention. David approaches, comes in, maybe pounds on his door, we're not sure. But look at verse 1, chapter 19. It was told Joab, behold, the king is weeping and mourning for Absalom. So the victory that day was turned into mourning for all the people, for the people heard that day. The king is grieving for his son. And the people stole into the city that day as people steal in who are ashamed when they flee in battle. Now let's just stop right there. You see the picture here? The victory was stolen by David. He wasn't celebrating the fact that his kingdom would be restored and his people were free from this horrible war. No, he was still crying over his son. I get the grief. I mean, you would get the grief as a failed father. I understand that. But he forgot that kings need to rise up above their grief and reign over the people. So we'll see that. It says here in verse, people were coming back into the city, that they stole into the city. This is Manaheim. That people slunk into the city. They crept into the city. They stole into the city. They were not looking at one another. They were ashamed at the behavior of the king, as those who flee in battle. So verse 4, the king covered his face. The king cried with a loud voice, again like in chapter 18, verse 33. Oh, my son Absalom, Absalom, my son, my son. Then Joab came into the house to the king and said, you have today covered with shame the faces of all your servants, who have this day saved your life and the lives of your sons and your daughters and the lives of your wives and your concubines. Verse 6, because you love those who hate you and hate those who love you. For you have made it clear today that commanders and servants are nothing to you. For today I know that if Absalom were alive and all of us were dead today, then you would be pleased. Now therefore arise, go out and speak kindly to your servants. For I swear by the Lord, if you do not go, not a man will stay with you this night. And this will be worse for you than all the evil that has come upon you from your youth until now. Now, is that one angry speech? That's pretty harsh, isn't it? Why was Joab so angry?
Because David discouraged his people and the soldiers.
David discouraged, how did he discourage them?
Because he was weeping and not counting their efforts as the value that they were.
Yeah.
And he was involved with more just mourning his son and not thinking of anybody else.
Yeah, it was all about him and not about the people who, his soldiers, to risk their lives for him, did they not? Many of them died. Why wasn't David weeping for them that died in battle? Why wasn't David rejoicing that the people, the soldiers who were still alive, and for that matter, the people who were at risk had they lost the war, why wasn't he celebrating that, or at least rejoicing in that? It was all wrong. And Joab was mad. And he gave it to him guns blazing, did he not? Job?
The truth.
What?
He said he told him the truth.
Yeah.
You love those who hate you. I mean, Absalom was out to take his kingdom.
Everything was,
And
yeah,
and yet, he's sorrowful over the guy who was
trying to kill him.
right. And,
Yeah.
And instead of rejoicing over the people who were loyal, right?
Yeah.
So,
Sometimes, just to stop, sometimes we make too big a deal over biology. You know? And God, even our sons and daughters are accountable before the Lord. It doesn't mean we abandon them, but it doesn't mean that we forget everybody else because of a wayward son or daughter. Everything was turned upside down. You hate those who love you, and you love those who hate you. How can it get worse than that? And if you don't make a change and make a change tonight, do something tonight, all your soldiers and all of your people are going to leave you. The city's going to be emptied out, and it's just going to be you. So you have to make up your mind, David. What are you going to do? So, and for a royal subject, even your number one guy, your general, to dress down the king in this way is pretty much unheard of. Can you think of any other passage that has anything like this? No. It didn't happen. And any other king would have done what? Joab would have been seriously dead. I mean, he would have lost his head over this whole thing, don't you think? But this was even different than Shammai, kicking stones and throwing rocks at David and cursing him. Shammai wasn't exactly his trusted general. We'll get to that later. But David couldn't and he didn't rebuke Joab. He couldn't be sure that his own guard would follow his orders to kill Joab, even if he said, that's what you should do. And in the moment, he probably thought he still needed Joab to command his army. So, but more than that, David immediately knew that Joab was right. Joab was right. Joab said the right thing, and this actually struck David to the heart. So he realized he'd abdicated his kingdom when Absalom overran Jerusalem, and now he was abdicating his kingly responsibilities, and in the process bringing shame on his own people. So the shepherd king was anything but a shepherd now. And this mighty warrior was a wilting flower. It's really what King David turned to. Why did that happen? Because over and over again, King David lost sight of what his responsibilities were as a king and as a father, and he was paying the price. So look at verse 8. So what's David do? The king rose and took his seat at the gate, and the people were all told, "Behold, the king is sitting at the gate." And all the people came before the king. The people wanted a king. They wanted a ruler. They wanted a leader, and they loved David. And so the word sped immediately. David is at the gate. Now again, this is the gate at Mahanaim. Somewhere it's across the Jordan where David had fled from Israel, and sitting at the gate's a really big deal, isn't it? In those days, we already know that. In fact, how did Absalom gain power over and cause the people to love him? He sat at the gate, or stood at the gate. It wasn't his job. But what he did, he stayed there for how many years? This is 3 or 4 years. I just forgot which one. But he stayed there multiple years, winning over the hearts of the people. And that's what kings do. And while he wasn't officially their, Absalom wasn't officially their judge and adjudicator, that's what he was doing. So, meanwhile, where's David? So now David finally gets it, and he goes and sits at the gate where he belonged. He's learned his lesson from none other than his own dead son, Absalom. So here we are. Word spreads quickly. David's sitting at the gate. He was kingly once again, or at least he gave that appearance, didn't he? The people were coming. But David was still deeply wounded. His credibility and reputation were in shreds. And Israel, the northern kingdom, and Judah, the southern kingdom, were once again acting as separate countries or territories. His own tribe of Judah was debating whether David should be returned to Jerusalem. I mean, this was a lot of this going on. And David's sitting at the gate, but there's turmoil and chaos behind him and now still all around him. So David now sets about trying to put things right. Now Israel, look at the latter part of verse 8. It says, the first part, if you recall, all the people came before the king. Now Israel had fled, every man to his own home. And all the people were arguing throughout all the tribes of Israel, saying, the king delivered us from the hand of our enemies and saved us from the hand of the Philistines. And now he is fled out of the land from Absalom. But Absalom, whom we anointed over us, is dead in battle. Now therefore, why do you say nothing about bringing the king back? Now, who's talking to whom here? It's this is just grabbing snippets, okay? Sound bites is what we're seeing going on here. You know, those little 20-second or 20 millisecond blurbs you see on whatever. You know, so this is what's going on. People are in turmoil. They've all gone back. They've fled back to their houses from being scattered all over the country, especially in battle, running from the battle. And they're talking. So we know that by God's grace and his divine plan, David's army had finally wrestled the northern kingdom of Israel from Absalom. They had already won the battle when Absalom got caught in the tree. That's almost putting the end to the end. But anyway, and you recall that was just all in the answer to prayer of David's prayer that we found in chapter 15. You remember when David was fleeing and he found out that Ahithophel had turned traitor, and he stopped and prayed right there as he was leaving Jerusalem. And he prayed this: Ahithophel is among the conspirators. And David said, "O Lord, please turn the counsel of Ahithophel into," remember what it is? Foolishness. Please. And that's exactly what happened. As his friend and counselor by the name of Hushai comes along, and David gives him instruction of how to give counsel to Absalom, which he does. Ahithophel's counsel was actually probably better than Hushai's, but God changed his heart and told him to take the bad counsel. He ends up losing the battle. All of this was the answer to prayer from David. But some of the people weren't convinced that David should be their king. There was a great debate, this arguing going on through all the tribes of Israel. So, and what we get here in these snippets, these sound bites, are the pros and cons of the arguments about David. The pros were this: David delivered us from the enemies, referring not to Absalom, whom they had followed, but to David's historical record of repeatedly defeating the Philistines. So not only winning of this battle, but his whole history. David's our man. He may have messed up now with all of his weeping and wailing and grieving, but he's still our man. Second, but the cons. On the other hand, David fled from Absalom. He was taken by surprise by his own son. This kind of reminds you of current history a week ago Saturday in Israel. Taken completely by surprise. Shouldn't have, but they were. And there's a horrible, horrible thing going on right now, as you all know. And on both sides. So on the con, and then back to the pros. But Absalom, whom we anointed, is dead. David's army defeated him, so he should be back in control. Why are you saying nothing? That's the why are you saying nothing is another way of saying, isn't that obvious? Isn't that David should be back in control? But remember, these are the same people that fled back to their homes. Why did they flee back to their homes? Because they had supported who? Absalom. Bad things happen to people that support the wrong guy. Bad things happen to people who lose wars. And they were pretty worried. So they're debating. We want David. No, we don't. Yes, we do. No, we don't. That's what's going on here. Verse 11. And King David sent this message to Zadok and Abiathar, the priests. Remember who they are? They accompanied David out of Jerusalem as he left. He sent them back to Jerusalem to be what? To be spies for him. So anyway, they're close to him. And so David tells Zadok and Abiathar, say to the elders of Judah, why should you be the last to bring the king back to his house when the word of all Israel has come to the king? You are my brothers, you are my bone and flesh. Why then should you be last to bring back the king? And say to Amasa, are you not my bone and my flesh? God do to me and more also, if you are not commander of my army from now on in place of Joab. Joab looks like he's going to get displaced. Why is that? Because Joab dressed him down, and he wasn't going to kill him, but he still shamed him, did he not? And there's more to the story we'll read later. But so David is slowly coming back to the old David. Not all the way, but his political prowess is showing up here. He feels the tide of opinion in the northern territory in Israel beginning to turn his way. Well, the pros are outweighing the cons, as it were, in these discussions. And but the southern territory comprised mostly of his own tribe, of David's tribe of what? Of Judah. And containing the city that's named for him, the city of what? Not the city of Jerusalem, the city of David. It's known as the Holy City, Jerusalem, and the city of David. And so he has the whole city named after him. Should he not go back there? But it's still under the influence of Absalom's followers. Keep that in mind. So he sends these faithful messengers, his previous spies, Zadok and Abiathar, he sends word to them there in Jerusalem to make his case. And David gave them the script, just as he had done before. And look at verse 11. He's telling them to tell the rulers in Jerusalem that were left there, don't be the last to bring King David back to his house. Again, a reminder that this still was the city of David. And that represented, by the way, the seat of government of the tribe of Judah and the whole southern kingdom. And in a broader sense, it represented the entirety of his kingdom. Think about how we say that today. They said it back then. There was the house of Saul. Today, you've heard often about the house of Saud in Saudi Arabia. The house refers to all the relatives of the king, and also to the entire kingdom. So we get that. He's reminded them of that. Secondly, in the latter part of verse 11, all Israel has come to the king over to David's side. Look, everybody in the northern kingdom has finally decided to come my way. Why are you the last? Now, that was probably a bit of an exaggeration, all Israel. Do you think it was all Israel? I think there was all this debate still going on, but the pros outweighed the cons, and they were maybe begrudgingly, but they were supporting David. The pro-David faction in Israel had won the day. And then they're supposed to make this emotional, psychological plea. You are of David's tribe of Judah, brothers, bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh. Hey, we're brothers. Judah is my tribe. We're all related. That's basically what he's saying. So in what seemed either a really shrewd move then or a breathtakingly stupid ploy, we're not sure yet, David and Abiathar are to tell Amasa that he will do what? He's going to replace Joab as head of David's army. And this bone of my bone reference was to Amasa's heritage in the tribe of Judah. Now, there wasn't a direct relationship, but they were of the same tribe. So you recall that Amasa had defected to Absalom. I don't know, this is an upgrade. Amasa had been Absalom's head of his army, commander of his army, but and he was the guy that would always try to choose the winning side. But appointing Amasa to lead the army accomplished two things for David. One, it was payback to Joab for killing Absalom and rebuking David for his excessive mourning. I mean, David at this point didn't like Joab so much. He was still afraid of Joab, but he was looking to put him in his place. And number two, it apparently turned the tide of opinion in Jerusalem, David's way. Look here at verse 14 again. He swayed the heart of all the men of Judah as one man. Verse 14. So that they sent word to the king, return both you and your servants. So the king came back to Jordan and Judah and came to Gilgal to meet the king and to bring the king over the Jordan. So David finally wins the heart of the people. You remember, it's really interesting how this heart thing works. Remember how Absalom took over, overturned Jerusalem. He won the hearts of the people. What is David doing now? He's all about winning the hearts of the people. At the end of the day, we think about it even in our own country and around the world. People vote for people often because they actually like them or love them. There's almost this worship thing going on sometimes. This is what's going on here. We know that David's choice of Amasa over Joab was effectively a death sentence for Amasa. Do you know that? You're going to read about that, hear about that next week. I think, Pete, you're going to cover that. So I won't get into the bloody details. But it basically a death sentence. Joab was ruthless. We saw that when he murdered Abner. And we'll see it again next week. So look at... I have my notes here, but I'm not going to go there. So he splits his command of his army, and David's looking to diffuse Joab's power and his influence. Ultimately, he gives instruction that Joab is to pay the ultimate price. In 1 Kings chapter 2, David avenges Joab's murders when David was dying, and he gives all these instructions to Solomon, and specifically how he's to deal with Joab. Joab pays the ultimate price. We're going to go into 1 Kings at least through chapter 2. That's where David ultimately dies, and we'll learn about it there. So now this narrative, it makes this sudden turn, and all of a sudden these new players show up. Shimei, Ziba, Mephibosheth, and Barzillai. And they all return to the stage. We met them before. Now here they are making this cameo appearance. So this portion of the chapter, at first, it seems out of place, or at least out of order, but it shows David acting as judge and king and being treated as such by his subjects, who all had agendas. Look at verses 16 to 23, we see Shimei. He's this distant relative of Saul who cursed David and threw stones at him as he fled Jerusalem. We see in verse 17 Ziba, who deceived David and defrauded Mephibosheth. We see in verses 24 to 30 Mephibosheth, Jonathan's son and Saul's grandson, who lost his land when Ziba deceived David in chapter 16, when he brought David 200 loaves of bread and 100 bunches of raisins and summer fruits and his skin of wine. You may recall that David had given one of King Saul's working farms to Mephibosheth, the one who was lame from a small childhood and had no means to care for himself. All of a sudden, he takes it from Ziba and gives it to Mephibosheth. This started this root of bitterness in Ziba. So in chapter 16, Ziba lies to David by suggesting that Mephibosheth had betrayed David, prompting David to rashly give all of Mephibosheth's land to Ziba. And interestingly, even then, strangely, David showed no concern about Mephibosheth. He didn't dig deep to find out what was really going on back then. And then we're reintroduced to David's friend and supporter, Barzillai, in verses 31 to 39. You might recall meeting Barzillai in chapter 17 when he brought the fleeing David and his entourage supplies, including beds, basins, sheep, and lots of food. Now, what you find here are two people that bring gifts to David. Ziba, who brought all this stuff, but he was just using it as a means to soften up David, to kiss up to him. And then you have Barzillai, who brings him all this food and supplies while he's fleeing, because he loved him and cared for him. So now we find the pardon of Shimei. Verse 16. And Shimei, the son of Gera, the Benjaminite from Bahurim, hurried to come down with the men of Judah to meet King David. And with him were 1,000 men from Benjamin. And Ziba, the servant of the house of Saul, with 15 sons and his 20 servants, rushed down to the Jordan before the king, and they crossed the ford to bring over the king's household and to do his pleasure. So you have Shimei and Ziba, both of them bad guys, right? One cursed and kicks threw stones at David, and the other deceived David. And how quickly are they moving here? In a big hurry, right? They rushed down. Why were they rushing down? Who won whose side were they on, really? The losing side. David's now in charge. They knew they only had one chance, and that was to go plead their case before David. They're hurrying to do that, lest David send soldiers out after them to kill them. So anyway, so now we have David. He's in the process of trying to restore his reign over the northern territory of Israel. Both Shammai and Ziba have a straightforward agenda. What's their agenda? Grovel at David's feet, trying to win him over, keep him from killing him. Shammai, in hope that David wouldn't kill him for dishonoring him. Ziba, who feared that his deception would come to light, was hoping to shore up his relationship with David in the hope that he could blunt any potential repercussions. So we got that. So here we find Shammai. He starts with this really long, obsequious speech to David. And he starts out that he falls down before David. Falls down. Verse 18b. And Shammai, the son of Gera, fell down before the king as he was about to cross the Jordan, going back into Israel. And he said to the king, "Let not my lord hold me guilty, or remember how your servant did wrong on the day that the king left Jerusalem. Let not the king take it to heart, for your servant knows that I have sinned. Therefore, behold, I have come this day, the first of all the house of Joseph, to come down to meet my lord the king. Here I am. And I'm going to give you this great speech, and it's nothing but a bunch of baloney, isn't it? Is there a word of sincerity here? Shammai's falling down wasn't an act of honor. It was just true groveling and trying to set David up. He says, "Look, I'm the first in the line of Joseph's house to acknowledge you as king. I'm the first here. You are the king. You're in charge. So don't take my actions to heart. I was foolish cursing you and throwing those stones at you. I know I've sinned against you. But look, was there any repentance here, folks? Was there sorrow? Was there really an apology? No, he's just reciting the facts. But he's doing it with this broken heart. He was just putting on his best act. He would make Richard Burton look a little... Who's that guy that played in Gladiator? Is that Mel Gibson or something? Russell Crowe. Pretty good actor, isn't he? Think of that guy. That's what's going on here. Didn't mean it. I've sinned against you, but don't kill me. Well, fortunately for Shammai, David is in a forgiving mood. And why was David in a forgiving mood?
He was guilty.
Now, he was guilty too. Exactly. And he's trying to make everybody like him again, if not love him. So he was just ready to forgive everybody. And so, by the way, he says he's from the tribe of Joseph. He's actually from the tribe of Benjamin. But the Joseph's tribe was larger and was sort of representative of the 10 northern tribes, so which Benjamin was included. So basically, Shammai claimed the heritage he thought would go over best with David. So there's a little mix-up. It's like, did we get this right? It took me a while to figure this out. What's going on here? This doesn't go over well with David's court. His guys, Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, answered, "Shall not Shammai be put to death?" Wait a minute, don't we want to kill this guy? Shouldn't we take his head off? Because why? Because he cursed the Lord's anointed, verse 22. But David said, "What have I to do with you, you sons of Zeruiah, that you should this day be as an adversary to me? Shall anyone be put to death in Israel this day? For I do not know, for do I not know that I am this day king over Israel?" And the king said to Shammai, "You shall not die." And the king gave him an oath. Promised him. Again, David's in the business of giving lots of oaths that he regrets later on. Here it is again. So, again, David said, "Don't I know I'm the king? I'm in charge here and you're not. And right now the king is not going to be taking heads off of anybody." You might recall that Abishai was Joab's brother and co-commander. You all remembering this? So David's reference to the sons of Zeruiah indicates that Job was there nodding his head as Abishai was asking why David just didn't let them chop off Shimei's head, especially since he was of the house of Saul. But David's response was an assertive, as we've seen him for some time. He says, "Don't you understand that I'm the king over Israel? Well, I know I'm the king, and I'm not putting anyone to death today as I continue to consolidate my rule. This is not the time for killing." That's what David's saying, and he's right, mostly. So David gave him this oath, which maybe wasn't such a good idea, and it later saved Shimei once again under Solomon's rule, but David never forgot. So as he lays dying, David instructs Solomon, and you can turn over there, we'll give a preview, 1 Kings chapter 2. This is interesting. Does David forget this? He gives him an oath, and he says, "I'm not going to kill you." But look what happens as David addressed Solomon, giving him final instructions as he's on his deathbed. 2 Kings 2:8. "And there is also with you Shimei, the son of Gera, the Benjaminite, from Bahurim, who cursed me with a grievous curse on the day when I went to Mahanaim. And when he came down to meet me at the Jordan, I swore to him by the Lord, saying, I will not put you to death with the sword. Now therefore do not hold him guiltless, for you are a wise man, and you will know what you ought to do to him. And you shall bring his gray head down with blood to Sheol." Well, actually, Solomon figured out a way to set Shimei up, because he knew Shimei's character. So when he told him, "You're going to stay in Jerusalem for the rest of your life. You're under house arrest, but I'm not going to kill you." But he knew that Shimei could never do that, and sure enough, after a few years, Shimei heads out of town for some important business, sneaks back in, but Solomon's Ring doorbells and all those other videos show him sneaking back in, calls him in, and said, "Hey, the condition was you stay in Jerusalem." You didn't, so we know what happens next. So anyway, so now we come to humble Mephibosheth, who referred to himself as what? In chapter 9? A dead dog. He said, "I'm a dead dog. I might as well be dead." Remember that? Remember him? He didn't have a really great self-image. But he makes his appearance now before Ziba can do anything or say anything to David. Now, Ziba has the one who stole the land from him by telling David that Mephibosheth had betrayed him. He never got a chance to say a thing. This guy was waiting off stage, never got to come on stage. Mephibosheth somehow gets there first. He's the guy who's lame, can't walk, but he has his people bringing him on a cart. Whatever happens, he gets to David first. Verse 24, Mephibosheth, the son of Saul, came down to meet the king. He's actually the grandson. He had neither taken care of his feet, nor trimmed his beard, nor washed his clothes, from the day the king departed until the day he came back in safety. And when he came to Jerusalem to meet the king said to him, "Why did you not go with me, Mephibosheth?" So the first thing that happens is David is saying, why didn't you come with me? Why did you stay in Jerusalem? And the implied question is what? Why did you betray me? What happened, Mephibosheth? But you notice there that David, again, didn't take any action. He wasn't in the killing mood this day. So he's going to listen. But notice the striking contrast between Shimei and Mephibosheth's soliloquies, as we're going to see. Shimei was calculating and manipulative. Mephibosheth, Jonathan's son and Saul's grandson, is truly mourning David's suffering. He's not taking care of himself from the time Absalom swept into Jerusalem. He's got twisted hair, bloody feet, dirty and tangled beard, filthy clothes, all signs of extreme mourning. But he wasn't faking it. So David asked him, again, this is his former tablemate, the guy he had invited to eat at his table for the rest of his life. He said, "Why didn't you go with me?" Well, there's this edge to David's question. And part of that is that he's wondering, did I believe a lie? Was Ziba right? So Mephibosheth's response was truly from the heart. Verse 26. He answered, My lord, O king, my servant, my servant, that is Ziba, deceived me, for your servant said to him, I will saddle a donkey for myself, that I may ride on it and go with the king. For your servant is lame. He has slandered your servant to my lord the king. But my lord the king is like the angel of God. Do therefore what seems good to you. For all my father's house were but men doomed to death before my lord the king. But you set your servant among those who eat at your table. What further right have I then to cry to the king? Wow. So Mephibosheth is saying, look, I told Ziba that I'm going to saddle a donkey for myself. I'm going to ride on it, and I'm going to go with the king. That never happened. Somehow, Ziba kept him from getting on that donkey. And then Mephibosheth said he slandered him. He slandered me. But he said then to David, my Lord is like an angel of God. So you do what you want. You remember somebody else who had that moniker? Ahithophel, who was the counselor respected all over Israel. They thought him like a representative of God. So he says, you're like an angel of God. Do what seems good to you. So the king says to him in verse 29, why speak any more of your affairs? I've decided. You and Ziba shall divide the land. And Mephibosheth says to the king, that's not fair. Now, he didn't say that. He says what? Oh, let him take it all, since my lord the king has come safely home. Now, was Mephibosheth just like blowing smoke here? I think this is the real deal. He sees himself as a dead dog. He sees himself that him and his whole family were on the road to destruction, to die. People didn't take care of the handicapped in those days. And David came in and rescued him, seated him at his table, and by extension, rescued his entire family. Gave him this land. He says, let him take it all. I'm just thankful that you're home, King David. Now, David might have suspected or might have even been convinced that Ziba had deceived him, but he did a great service again to Mephibosheth by not pursuing the facts more carefully. David made a pretty rash decision here, did he not? He just cuts the baby in half. His son figures out how to do that right, but he just basically did it. There's no real justice here, but at least Mephibosheth gets half his land back, and presumably Ziba will farm it for him. But he doesn't complain, or he doesn't press the point. My entire family was doomed to death when you intervened and seated me at your table. So, David, you come safely home. This is a great example of humility. And he really did love David. Keep in mind what he looked like when he came to David. This is something you couldn't just put on a costume, pardon?
He was dressed as he was mourning.
He was mourning. Yeah, his mourning was the real deal. He wasn't the king, and David's. This is in juxtaposition to David's excessive mourning. This is a mourning over David losing his kingdom, and so he doesn't trim his beard. He doesn't wash his hair. His clothes are just disgusting. This is a sign of excessive mourning. He couldn't have just whipped that on that morning. So, he loves David. Remember 1 Corinthians 13, love is described as love does not insist on its own way. And that's exactly how Mephibosheth responded. Now we come to Barzillai, and he declines David's invitation to accompany him to Jerusalem in verse 31. Now Barzillai the Gileadite had come down from Rogelim, and he went on with the king to the Jordan to escort him over the Jordan. Barzillai was a very aged man, 80 years old, and he had provided the king with food while he stayed at Mahanaim, which we already went over, for he was a very wealthy man. Verse 33, and the king said to Barzillai, come over with me, and I will provide for you with me in Jerusalem. But Barzillai said to the king, how many years have I have to live, that I should go up with you to the king to Jerusalem? I am this day 80 years old. Can I discern what is pleasant and what is not? Can your servant taste what he eats or what he drinks? Can I still listen to the voice of singing men and singing women? Why then should your servant be an added burden to my lord the king? Your servant will go a little way over the Jordan with the king. Why should the king repay me with such a reward? Please let your servant return, that I may die in my own city, near the grave of my father and my mother. Well, we first met Barzillai, if you recall, in chapter 17. He brought all these provisions to David's army because he was a very wealthy man. And Barzillai was old, but he was also wise. But he was probably experiencing some cognitive decline, and he was smart enough, aware enough to realize it. And this is really important. How do I know that? Because he says, can I discern what is pleasant and what is not? He could no longer taste his food or drink. He's going deaf. Can I still listen to the voice of singing men and singing women? A rhetorical question. The answer being no. Can't hear him. Doesn't see very well. Doesn't taste his food very well. Maybe he had COVID. I don't know. But he's not fully functional in those regards. So he knows it would be better for him to return to his home to die in his old age than to accept David's sincere offer and be a burden to the king. Sounds fair enough. Now our plan, Cindy and my plan, is to be a burden to our children, but he you think I'm joking. But look, he respects David. He honors David. He loves David. And he doesn't want to be a burden. And besides that, he has his own family to take care of him in his own city. I'm going to go be buried with my father and my grandfather. So remember, going back to David on his deathbed in the 1 Kings chapter 2, he's giving instruction to Solomon. This is what he says about Barzillai. He says to Solomon, deal loyally with the sons of Barzillai the Gileadite, because presumably Barzillai is dead by now, but this is his sons, and let them be among those who eat at your table, for with such loyalty they met me when I fled from Absalom, your brother. David remembers. So now we come to Chimham, and I've labeled this in my notes, Chimham wins the lottery. We're introduced to Chimham. We've never heard of him before. We don't know for sure who he is, and we never hear from him again. He just sort of like makes this cameo appearance. He might have been Barzillai's son or relative, probably. So in verse 37b, but here's your servant Chimham. Let him go over with my lord the king, and do for him whatever seems good to you. And the king answered, Chimham shall go over with me, and I will do for him whatever seems good to you. And all that you desire of me I will do for you. Then all the people went over the Jordan, and the king went over, and the king kissed Barzillai and blessed him, and he returned to his own home. And the king went on to Gilgal, and Chimham went on with him, and all the people of Judah and all the people of Israel brought the king on his way. Everybody's helping David get back to Jerusalem. So we don't know anything about Chimham, but the depth of David's friendship and appreciation for Barzillai really stands out loudly here, does it not? One, David immediately grants Barzillai's request. He bestows on him all that he offered Barzillai to Chimham. All that you desire of me, I will do for you, he's telling Chimham. Wow. He probably didn't even know who this guy was. But if Barzillai says he's good and wants to let him win the lottery and not himself, that's what he's going to do. David really loved Barzillai. So, secondly, David publicly showed affection for Barzillai. The text suggests more than a formal perfunctory, this Hebrew kiss. This was maybe even a hug. Never know. We don't know for sure, but for sure a blessing. So David is now back across the Jordan. He's on his way to Jerusalem. In 40b, it says, all the people of Judah and all the people of Israel brought the king on his way. Now, this didn't really go over well with the leaders of the northern territory. They felt that they had earned the right to have David set up his reclaimed seat of government in Israel, the northern territory, not in Jerusalem. Look at verse 41. And this kind of ends here with this debate going on. Then all the men of Israel came to the king and said to the king, why have our brothers and the men of Judah stolen you away and brought the king and his household over the Jordan and all David's men with him? All the men of Judah answered the men of Israel, because the king is our close relative. Now this is the people of Judah, southern kingdom. Because the king is our close relative. Why then are you angry over this matter? Have we eaten at the king's expense at all, at the king's expense? Or has he given us any gift? Has there been any favoritism shown here? Verse 43. And the men of Israel answered the men of Judah, we have 10 shares in the king, and in David also we have more than you. Why then did you despise us? Were we not the first to speak of bringing back our king? So the debate is going on now between northern and southern tribes, the territories. Who should rightly reestablish? Where should David rightly reestablish his kingdom? What do you think? So this debate continues. It lays the groundwork, by the way, for the eventual division of the kingdom under Rehoboam and Jeroboam. It's going to happen, but there's always this tension. We're not sure if there's a delegation from Judah or a Zoom meeting going on. We're not sure, but both parties make their case before David. And the dialogue goes kind of like this. The men of Israel first in verse 41. Judah's trying to steal you away from us. Their implication, our people donated provisions to you and his army. We helped them win the battle over Absalom. We're by far the bigger tribe. There's 10 of it. Look, you're trying to steal David from us. And this suggestion that Judah had stolen David was an attempt to amp up the rhetoric and emotions. If you don't have the best argument, what do? You call people names and you yell louder. Exactly. And you use inflammatory language. We see that in politics all the time, don't we? You don't get your way, you just start calling people names. And you yell louder. It doesn't matter if you make any sense. That's what they were doing. So now the men of Judah respond. In verse 42, David is our close relative. He's of the tribe of Judah. Jerusalem is where he rightly belongs. There's no reason to be angry. You don't need to be angry. We've done nothing to entice him to come to Judah. We've never taken advantage of him. We've never eaten at his table. We haven't tried to buy his favor. We haven't given him any gifts, and he hasn't done anything for us. Well, that may be a little hyperbole there too. But nonetheless, that's their argument. So the men of Israel respond in 43a. You want to talk tribes? 10 of the 12 tribes are in Israel. In case you haven't done the math, that's 83.333% of all the tribes are in the northern kingdom. Okay, maybe they did the math, that was B. But nonetheless, you get the picture. They're saying we're the bigger territory. We've got 8 of the 10 tribes. He should be with us. And by the way, we have more of David's distant relatives living with us than you do. In David, also, we have more than you in David. The idea being that there's a lot of relatives of David living in the northern territory. So, just by numbers. And by the way, we were the first to talk to David about bringing David back from exile. We were not the first to speak of bringing our king back. Maybe so. So then they try shaming, because of course, if you don't get your way, you talk louder, you call names, and you shame. So what they're doing, they're saying here, why are you despising us? Why are you despising us? There's no reason for that. So 43b says this, but the words of the men of Judah were fiercer than the words of the men of Israel. Wow. What does that mean? Well, the word can be translated, Hebrew word can be translated as it is in the NASB and the King James, harsher. So the word here means harsher or fiercer. What it means is that their words, the men of Judah, their argument prevailed. David comes back to Jerusalem. And by the way, the will of the Lord prevailed, did it not? Once again, David went back where God intended for him to go. So now this chapter just ends suddenly. It's just now suddenly over. It feels like we should give like a recap or a summary statement, or there's a lesson to be learned here. But no, he left it up to you, class. What lessons are to be learned here? The debate goes Judah's way. Their arguments were more persuasive. And by the way, blood relationships are always the deal sealer. But the It goes without saying this is the will of the Lord. So what lessons did we learn from this chapter, class? How about any lesson? Anything that we can learn?
Oh, what kind of lessons?
Any kind of lesson. What lessons were there to be learned from this? Yeah, Kevin.
To be sincere with your asking of forgiveness, like have a genuine heart.
Yeah.
Goes a long way.
Don't be like Shammai.
Yeah. So be, I don't know. Tenderness of heart is
Be sincere when you offer an apology, making sure it's the real thing. Don't try to manipulate. Absolutely. Yeah. Yes, Chris.
I mean, once again, here we see David with no, ask the Lord, seeking after the Lord.
Exactly.
He didn't ask the Lord what to do. He just.
There's not a prayer that he didn't ask the Lord what to do. David didn't. There's no prayer here. I dropped one in that I grabbed from a previous chapter. But no, there's no dialogue with the Lord. There's no seeking wisdom, right? David makes a rash decision. When we have big decisions to make in our lives, like especially that deal with other people and affect their lives, what are we to do?
Seek the Lord's wisdom, James.
Pray and ask. If any of you lacks wisdom, let him what? Ask of God, who gives it to you and doesn't upbraid, doesn't make you feel foolish for asking, right? Proverbs tells us, Solomon tells us, there's wisdom in a multitude of counselors. David could have asked for counsel. He could have stopped. I remember my grandma Irene Isabella. She would tell us over and over again. She says, never make an important decision without sleeping on it. Always sleep on your decisions before you make a big decision. She never told me to get counsel, but that was the implication. So David didn't do that. What else? What else did we learn? Yes.
I think, I forget, the older guy that,
Barzillai?
yeah, I think that's an example of, in all this craziness, of somebody that's lived a life worthy of God, where he's realizing that at the end, there's really nothing you, the king, can give me that I need at this point. I'm about to die probably. So here's somebody though that could use your favor. So if kind of out of selflessness, he's saying, let's let this guy, get a shot.
Now Barzillai lived a life of faithfulness and humility, and when it came, and he's old, when it came time he realized he couldn't accept the gift from David, he gave it to someone else. He just didn't walk away. That says a lot, doesn't it? He was thinking about someone else and not himself. That's right. There's one more thing really big. The chapter starts with it. All right, Kevin.
Is that when you have only maybe twofold, as when you have someone that is wise and trusted giving you counsel, adhering to that counsel, like to do it, like Joab did, and then his part is the general being brave enough to do the right thing, even if it means your head.
Yeah, exactly. Being brave enough to do the right thing, even if it means your head. Boy. So I'm thinking going back, how did the chapter start? Joab did what? He dressed down David for his what? Why? For his, not just his mourning. Mourning's okay, but for
Neglecting his responsibility.
yeah.
He believed himself
Yeah.
in battle.
Yeah. You remember David wrote the book of Ecclesiastes, and Ecclesiastes says there's a time for everything, and there's a time for joy, and there's a time for mourning. And maybe he was thinking about his own father in this instance when he wrote that. There is a time for mourning, but we can't. But mourning, especially for the believer, should not cripple us. It should not. Are we done with the video, George?